city would call Richard Crivello to the stand.
Your right hand. You swear or affirm no truth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please introduce yourself to the jury.
My name is Richard Crivello.
Mr. Crivello, where do you work?
I work for the crime lab for the state of Iowa, which is located in Ankeny.
How long have you worked there?
About 8.5 years.
Prior to working there, where did you work?
Prior to working there, I worked for the Federal Bureau of Investigation at their ID section in Washington, D.C. I worked at the state of North Carolina at their crime laboratory and in their ID section for approximately 7.5 years. And I worked for the state of Wyoming at their crime laboratory located in Cheyenne, Wyoming for approximately 22 years.
Which section of the DCI laboratory in the state of Iowa do you work in?
I'm assigned to the latent print or impression evidence section.
And can you briefly give the jurors an overview of what type of training, experience, and education you have received to become a latent print examiner?
My formal education consists of a 2-year police science degree from the Wake County Technical College, which is located in Raleigh, North Carolina. In addition to that, I have several years of education with the state of Wyoming at the Laramie, University of Wyoming Laramie, in the study of administration of justice. I never obtained a 4-year degree. As far as my on-the-job training in the area of latent prints, I received 480 hours in science of fingerprints, which was provided by the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Washington, D.C. I was in a 2-year training progression with the state of North Carolina in the methods of processing evidence for latent prints, preserving latent prints, and the comparison of latent prints with known individuals. I received I did a 1-week advanced latent print school with the Federal Bureau of Investigation that was taught in Durham, North Carolina. Have attended numerous seminars and workshops. I am a member of the International Association for Identification, and I hold a certification in the area of latent prints from them.
Mr. Crivello, and I may have forgotten to do this, I apologize. I don't remember if I had to spell your last name for the record.
No, you did not.
Please do that.
It's spelled Crivello.
Thank you. Mr. Crivello, I want to ask you about some terminology as a latent print examiner. The term latent print, what does that mean?
A latent print is a hidden chance print, and it is made by friction ridges. These ridges appear on 3 portions of the body: the fingers, the palms, and then the soles of the feet. On these ridges, there are pores that are connected to glands and ducts. These glands constantly secrete chemicals and fluids, and they appear on the surface of the finger. The ridge detail on the fingers and palms tend to pick up other foreign matter, such as oils from the face or from the hair, if you touch your face or hair. And if you touch an article, some of this residue may be left behind that can be made visible through processing, either with chemicals or powders, and then preserved for comparison with individuals at a later time.
So if I were to touch the desk that I'm sitting in front of and lift up, if I can't see anything, does that mean I did not leave a latent print behind?
No, that does not.
How would you go about trying to find out if I left a latent print on the table?
In that particular instance, a powder might be used, a contrasting powder, a light powder, so that you can visualize this print as it adheres to any of the moisture or oils that are left behind. If you had a big enough container, you could place it in a container and super glue that. When we use the process of super glue, we excite super glue to give off a white smoke. This bonds with any moisture or oils that are on the surface. It polymerizes and becomes semi-permanent. And that is, you can rub it lightly and it won't go away. You can then, if you can visualize it, you can preserve it through photography. If you can't visualize it at that point, there are some dye stains that can be placed on the surface. that will be absorbed by the super glue, and through the use of an alternative light source and special goggles, you can view this and then preserve it in that fashion.
So if you came to the table and dusted the table and you saw something that looked like a fingerprint, you could take a picture of it, correct?
That's correct, you can take a picture.
And what you're doing with the picture is, it's a close-up picture. You want to use that to compare to a known fingerprint, correct?
Yes, we would photograph it with a scale so that we could take it back to a one-to-one, so that when you're doing your comparison with your knowns, you have the same size as the known finger and the latent print.
Could you also use some type of tape to lift that print?
Yes, they do have tape that just take a piece off and you would rub the tape on the area where the print is. You would lift that piece of tape and then you would place it on a contrasting background. That is, if you're using a dark color, you would use a white background. If you're using a light color, you would use a black background, and then that print would stay visible, and you could preserve it in that way and actually compare the print on that piece of tape with the known impressions at a later time.
When you're doing that, is a fingerprint that's left behind, what percentage of moisture is that?
Generally, around 99% of a latent print is just water residue. The remainder is chemicals that may be left behind.
And so what you're doing with the dust or super glue is that's adhering to that moisture.
Yes, that is correct.
And so then you're looking at those rich details to make a comparison to a known print.
Yes.
We talked about latent. Does that mean hidden? You can't see with the naked eye?
Generally, yes, that's what it does mean.
How about a patent print?
A patent print would be a print that you could actually see on the surface of an article. Generally, this is in a foreign substance, such as possibly blood, or maybe oil, something of that nature, so that when the article is touched, you can actually see the rich detail that has been left behind.
So maybe aging myself. Do you remember silly putty?
Yes.
You put your finger in there and you took it off and you see a print?
Yes.
That'd be a patent print?
Actually, that would be what they call a plastic print, because you would actually have ingrained the ridge detail into the putty itself. So they would call that a plastic impression.
Is there any way to age a fingerprint? In other words, if you found my print on this table, could you say it was from today, from yesterday, or from a year ago if I was here?
No, there would be no way to determine age in that fashion.
The only thing you can do is say, if it's there, the print was there.
Yes, the only way you could guesstimate as far as an age of when a print may have been left is if you know when the surface was last cleaned, and then you could say from the time it was cleaned till the time you removed it from that article would be the time frame that that print could have been made.
When you're looking at prints, do you determine if it's suitable for identification?
Generally, after we've processed the article and then collected the latent prints, we examine those to see whether or not there's sufficient information at that time to take that back to an individual.
In the terminology you're using, suitable for identification, what does that mean? What are you trying to determine?
What you're trying to determine is whether or not there's sufficient information in the latent print that if you had a set of known impressions of an individual, you could actually identify that person as having left that print behind.
Every time that someone touches an item, does that mean they leave a fingerprint behind?
Not necessarily.
Explain.
Well, there are several factors that will determine whether a print is left behind. One of the first things to consider is the individual themselves. If you go in and wash your hands and you come out and you touch an article, the possibility of having any of those chemical or fluids on your hands at that time may not be present. So there may not be a print left behind in that fashion. An individual, their work, if an individual is, say, in construction and they work with concrete, the line of the concrete has a tendency to dry your fingers out and also to wear the ridge detail away. So that individual may not leave a print behind. A person who works a lot, let's say in an office or in a bank where they're constantly touching papers, a lot of times their hands are dry so they don't leave a print behind. The surface has a determining factor. Is your surface a smooth and glossy surface, or is it a rough textured surface? If it's a smooth surface like a glass or a ceramic cup, the print may more readily be left behind as opposed to, say, vinyl or leather. And then environmental factors also play a role in this. After the print has been deposited, if you leave something out in the sun will bake or evaporate the moisture left behind. If it's out in the rain may wash it away. After this article has been stored or retained for examination, how is that retained? Is it in a packaging where the article can move around readily and therefore possibly rub the print away? Or is it static, that is, preserved so that there isn't any movement and you have a better chance of obtaining it? It's factors such as these that go into determining whether a print may be left behind that can be processed and become visible and preserved.
So if a fingerprint is approximately 99% moisture, if something was used to eliminate moisture like cat litter, could that affect your ability to find prints?
That could, especially if, as it's being placed on the article, is rubbing against it, and determine, also the amount of time it sits there on top of it.
Does bleach affect fingerprints at all?
I would say that bleach could wash it away. Generally, when you use bleach on something, it's not just a static, or just pouring it over. Generally, you have it on some kind of article, you pour it out, you rub the surface down that you're cleaning, so that would generally wipe a print away.
So if somebody's cleaning a table or a floor with a rag, with or without bleach, that could take away fingerprints?
That could.
I want to ask you about, in this case, Mr. Crivello, did you examine some items for the possibility of finding fingerprints?
Yes, I did.
I want to first start with, was there a letter on the outside of the door? I'll show you State's Exhibit number 1. I'm sorry, I misspoke. State's Exhibit number 3. This is a Ziploc, so you can open it if you need to pull it out and look at it. And if you need the packaging, I have that, Mr. Crivello. Can you tell us what State's Exhibit number 1 is?
This is State's Exhibit number 3.
I keep calling it, so I'm sorry.
State's Exhibit number 3 is a piece of paper that was submitted to the laboratory for examination. I can tell that I had this at one time because it has my case number, the item that was assigned to it, the date that I received it, and my initials.
And did you look at the note for the possibility of any fingerprints?
Yes, I did.
And explain to the jurors, how do you examine a piece of paper to try to find out if there's any fingerprints on it?
A piece of paper is an absorbent particle, and therefore the processing with such things as powder or superglue would not affect the latent print. Chemicals are used to process latent prints on paper articles as the moisture or oils are absorbed into it. The chemicals then can then get into the paper and then react with any of the basically amino acids left behind in this particular case, and then the print would become visible through the use of heat and steam.
And were you able to do those tests to State's Exhibit number 3?
Yes, I was.
And what was the result of your test?
Upon completion of the processing and examination, there was one latent print that was left behind on this piece of paper that could be identified.
And can you show the jury where that latent print was found?
It would be on the lower left-hand corner of the paper article. There is a little semicircle in blue ink with the number 1A above it and my initials. So this would be the area where that print became visible.
And was it suitable for identification to compare to a known print?
Yes, it was.
Did you have at that time, when was it, back up, when did you look at State's Exhibit number 3 for latent prints?
I looked at that back in May of 2010.
So once, in May of 2010, once you found a suitable latent print for identification, did you have any known prints to compare to?
Not initially at that time.
And just so it's clear, when we say known print, what you look for is somebody to have gone to either a police department or some department where they take a fingerprint, as we see the fingerprint cards. Is that correct?
Yes.
So somebody can say, Bob Smith came in, I took his prints, I'm sending these known prints so you can compare it to the ones you found.
Yes, that would be the way it would be done.
Do you also have a computer system that checks outstanding fingerprints as well?
Yes, we do.
What type of computer system do you have?
It's called an automated fingerprint identification system. It's the system that the state has to store all of its records in regard to fingerprints. This database is, as I said, computer generated. We have a terminal where we can take the latent print and introduce a photograph or a copy of that into the system with certain markings showing the identification characteristics. We can request a list of individuals, and not by name, but by number. So you can go anywhere from 1 to 100 in regard to requesting individuals be respondents. Then when your respondent list comes back, you have to go back and look at each one of those individually, do a comparison with that on the screen to see whether or not that print was made by that individual.
So it's State's Exhibit number 3, the note that's been identified on the door to Mark Koster's home. That suitable print, did you put it through the database?
Yes, I did.
And what was the results?
There was negative results. I did not find anybody that could match that print.
Is there any way to tell us on State's Exhibit 3 on that note when that latent print would have been put on there?
No, there's no way.
So if the piece of paper had been on the table months or years earlier and somebody touched it, could have been that print from that long ago?
Yes, that's possible.
At some point, were you provided the known fingerprints of the Leslie Gilson?
Yes, I believe I was.
And did you compare Mr. Gilson's
Yes, I did.
fingerprints? Was his print the one on the note?
May I refer to my notes? That print was not made by the individual who made the known impressions of Leslie George Gilson.
Was there some writing on the note?
There was some faded printing and numbers on the note.
Did you do anything to enhance or be able to read the note?
At a later time, the note was examined through sidelighting.
And when would that have been about?
I received it again in August of 2013 for that examination.
Can you explain to us what that means as you use sidelighting to look at State's Exhibit 3, the note?
Basically, I took a light source and just held it at an angle so that the light just glanced across the top of the piece of paper. And at that time, you could see indentions or indented printing in that or on that paper.
And were you able to, when you looked at the note with the sidelighting, were you able to determine what the note said?
I determined what I thought what the note said.
And what was that?
According to my notes, the note had printed on it, "To whom it may concern, gone to Florida with Tom for the winter, see you in the spring, Mark, contact," and then the number symbol, 863-692-4321.
I want to move it back now to what you were doing in 2010, May of 2010. You told us you checked the note, State's Exhibit 3 for latent print. Did you also check there was a computer mouse, did you check?
Yes, sir.
And did you check that for latent prints?
Yes, I did.
And what was the results of checking that?
There were no latent prints on that article, and by that, the determination was you could not tell that it even had been handled. There was no ridge detail, no smudges, no smears.
How about something that's used commonly, like a doorknob? If it's used commonly by a person or many people, would you expect to find a lot of suitable prints for identification on a doorknob?
Most likely not, just because of the fact that other individuals are always touching it, moving it, so you would have overlapping, possibly overlapping ridge detail, smudge detail where you can see maybe some ridge detail, but there may be movement in it, so the possibility of identifying that is very slim.
And did you find some DVDs that you didn't find, were they submitted, they were found in a kitchen cabinet?
There were some DVDs and some DVD, CD cases that were submitted.
And this is back in May of 2010, were you able to get any latent prints for suitable for identification?
No, sir.
Were you able to, in May of 2010, find any latent prints suitable for identification on any other items?
No, sir. I was not.
If you look at, and I may have had it down wrong, your lab exhibit number 4. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
Did you develop 3 latent prints suitable for identification?
Yes, sir, I did on those.
Okay.
I am mistaken.
That's okay. My notes got it wrong. Can you explain to the jurors what we're talking about, lab exhibit number 4?
Lab exhibit number 4 consisted of some black plastic Memorex DVD-R cases, some Memorex DVD-Rs. There were several CD jewel cases, other assorted DVDs and DVD cases.
And were you able to develop any that was suitable?
Actually, I was, yes, sir. I was mistaken when I said I did not.
And how many were you able to develop?
There were actually 3 assorted cases or DVDs.
And these 3 prints that were suitable for identification off those cases, did you put them into that computer database?
Yes, I did.
And what was the result?
The results on that were negative at that time.
At a later time, did you check those 3 latent prints and compare them to the known fingerprints of Leslie Gilson?
Yes, I did.
And what was the result of that?
And upon completion of the comparison of those latent prints with those known prints, it was determined that that individual did not make any of those latent prints.
And at a later time, did you also receive some known fingerprints from the defendant, Mr. John David Green?
Yes, I did.
And were you able to compare his known prints to those 3 on the DVDs?
Yes, I did.
And what was the result?
The results were that 2 of them were not made by that individual, and 1 of them couldn't be identified or eliminated as being made by that individual.
So in one print, you can't say either way.
That's correct.
Did you ever have Mark Koster's known fingerprints to make any comparisons to?
No, sir, I did not.
I want to turn your attention now to November of 2012, November 7th of 2012, were some items submitted to you or to the laboratory by Mike Schmidt?
I remember some were submitted. Yes, they would be on that date.
You just want to walk through these items so we go through them. Was one of them a paper lampshade?
Yes, sir.
And did you look for latent prints on that?
Yes, I did.
And did you find any?
There were no prints on that lampshade.
Again, does that mean no one ever touched the lampshade?
No, that does not.
Did you look at some miscellaneous papers and a TV remote?
Yes, I did.
Did you find any latent prints on either one of those items?
There were either no latent prints or no latent prints suitable for identification.
And we should clarify that. When you say no prints suitable for identification, what does that mean?
That means you could tell the article had been touched. There were smudges, some limited ridge detail, but none of this could be taken back to the person who left it behind.
Did you also look at a black container that was found near Mark Coster's body?
There was a black container. I don't know where the location was.
And did you find any latent prints suitable for identification?
There were no latent prints on that article.
Did you look at a couple matchbooks?
Yes, sir.
Were you able to find anything on the matchbook?
There were no latent prints on the matchbooks.
Did you look at a roll of plastic wrap?
Yes, sir.
Did you find anything?
There were no latent prints on the roll of plastic wrap.
Did you look at some miscellaneous books?
Yes, sir.
Did you find anything on those books?
There were no latent prints on any of those books.
Did you look at some papers that had writing on it?
There was one piece of paper, other than the one we've already discussed, and there were no latent prints on that.
Did you look at a ceramic coffee mug from a garbage can? That's your glass?
Yes, I did. Yes, there were no latent prints suitable for identification.
There was a metal furnace panel that Mr. Schmidt had showed us earlier today that he collected. Did you look at that?
Yes, I did.
And what did you find in that?
There were no latent prints suitable for identification.
Now, does that mean there was no print on the furnace panel?
No, there were smudges and smears and some limited ridge detail.
The last area I want to talk to you, Mr. Crivello, about is, do you have another role at the laboratory in examining documents?
Yes, sir, I do occasionally.
And explain what that is.
I previously, before I came to the crime lab here in Iowa, I was the documents examiner for the state of Wyoming. During this time of my employment in the state of Wyoming, I went through 3.5 years of training in the area of question documents. Basically, it consisted of going to several different schools, one with the Secret Service in Glencoe, Georgia, at their training facility, and then with the Federal Bureau of Investigation in their training facility in Quantico. I was under the supervision of the documents examiner for the state of Colorado for that 3.5 years, where all of my work was reviewed and then reports written by that individual. When we look at an article or when you say question documents, question documents, what you're talking about is any tangible form of communication whose authenticity or origin is in question. That could be handwriting, it could be handprinting, it could be copies, it could be obliterations, anything of that nature.
So what you're doing is you're looking at a document and you're trying to determine who wrote the document?
That is one of the areas that we look at, yes, sir.
In State's Exhibit number 3, that's in front of you, the note that was taken from Mark Coster's house, did you look at that document?
Yes, I did.
And how were you able to make, or did you have some known handwriting of somebody?
I had 3 pieces of paper that were purported to have the known exemplars of Mr. Coster.
We're referring to Mark Coster, right?
That's correct.
When would you have done this? What date are we talking about?
The examination would have started somewhere around October 24th of 2013.
So you took the note, State's Exhibit number 3, and you compared it to 3 alleged purported handwritings of Mark Coster.
I attempted to do Yes, sir.
And by doing this comparison, were you able to make any determination?
No, sir, I was not.
Was there any, does the faded writing make it difficult to do the comparison?
Yes, that was one of the limiting factors in regard to doing a handwriting comparison. The fact that the writing isn't clear, the printing wasn't clear and distinct. You normally need to clear or and distinct. So that was one of the limiting factors. The other limiting factors was the limited amount of known that was comparable with what was in question. So we didn't have all the same words or letters, formations that are together. So that limits the examination also.
And you mentioned the note states exhibit number 3 that was on Mark Hospital's door. That was also chemically processed for legal prints?
Yes, it was chemically processed before a request for documents examination was done.
And does that also make it difficult?
Yes, it can.
I don't have any other questions, thank you.
Mr. Crivello, do you call yourself a scientist?
Yes, sir.
I believe I heard you talking about when you examined fingerprints. They just assign the ones that you're comparing them to a number, is that correct?
The ones that can be identified?
Correct.
Yes, sir.
So you've got the one that the evidence team picks up, they put that on a screen on like one side of the screen, and then the ones that you're comparing it to come up on the other side? Or do you just do it physically like right there?
I do it physically as far as comparing the latent with a set of known. When we do the APHIS searches, they come up side by side on a screen, and those are done on a screen.
Okay, so you're comparing the APHIS searches on screen just visually between the two, correct?
That's correct.
And the one is going to say, fingerprint lifted from exhibit 17 or item 17, correct?
Actually, what happens when you place that into the APHIS system is that it's given a unique identifying number. And when the results come up, that number comes up on the screen underneath the latent print, and then the knowns come up next to it with an identifying number.
Okay. But it's not a name, right?
No, it is not a name.
There's a reason for that, right? That they don't put a name there instead of just using a number?
Our system is set up that way in regard to having just a number.
Yeah, but there's a specific reason that they did it that way, right?
I couldn't tell you what goes on with that portion of the system because I had no hand in creating the system. I know that the FBI APHIS system, names do come up when you do get results.
You've heard of the idea of confirmation bias, right?
Yes, sir, I have.
And if you had a name on there, you might run the risk of having confirmation bias jeopardize the results, correct?
That can have a play in it, yes, sir, at some time.
Okay, explain to the jury what confirmation bias is.
Confirmation bias is a bias that an examiner may have because he has previous information in regard to what has happened.
Okay, so like if you had a name of somebody in this investigation previously, and then you're comparing prints, and you see that person's name come up, it might call into question your ability to judge those fairly and independently, correct?
I would say that if the examiner is doing his job correctly, it should not.
Should not, but it's possible,
It happens.
right?
It's happened. Yes, sir.
So this isn't just a concept. Confirmation bias is real, right?
Yes, it has happened.